Start very briefly and then yield the floor to Mr. Director General for a short introduction. Okay. Waiting for a couple of people.
I'll get you.
Okay, very good. So thank you very much. Let's start. So, Excellencies, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have some comments from a mix of officials and practitioners. The CEO Caucus is the place for, I would say, an exchange on what is working and what is not working, and to get information coming from the industry, from people who have an habit of working with the PV sector. And we have some distinguished speakers today that will have the time to introduce themselves. The goal here of that session is definitively to understand better which are the barriers, which are the limitations, and we will go through a certain number of subjects during the 1 hour 15 where we will be together. And this put together with comments coming from CEOs from other geographies in the world will lead to a complete document at some point, and will live year after year with the idea that ISA should contribute also to accelerate the development of PV all over the world, and especially in Africa. That's the continent we are in for the time being, by understanding from the field, from the people who have the habit of working with PV, fighting with local authorities, fighting with financiers, fighting with incumbents sometimes, to understand how to accelerate and which are the policies which should be put in place. I've heard many, many interesting things this morning in the session, many demands from many countries which are going in numerous directions, from ISA contributing to financing, to the equity crunch, to financing issues with the necessity for hedging investment, whether investments as they exist for the time being fit the need of many countries, whether we should go for large-scale, small-scale installation, whether it should coupled with electric mobility, with the need for agriculture, and so on and so on. But before starting this, and before giving the floor to Mr. Director General for an introduction to this session, I really would like all countries around the table, if you know people in the industry who have something to bring in terms of contribution, there will be numerous virtual sessions in the 2 coming years where these people will be able to contribute, bring their experience in, and contribute to having a much better understanding of why this sector is not developing in some countries at the speed where it could develop. And that's something that ISA would like to do through the CEO Caucus. It's really benefiting from that experience, gathering it in a comprehensive document that you will have at your disposal. Mr. Director General, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you, everyone. I will just be brief by mentioning 3 points. First, that the private sector CEO Caucus has now been a regular part of all regional committee meetings in all regions. And the reason is because we firmly believe that solar will be resolved through private sector investment. It is very important to hear from their side what are the changes in the regulatory and the policy regime and barriers that exist. Second, in case of Africa, we would really like, especially to hear that we discussed a lot about issues on utility scale solar, on DRE and financing, what is a perspective from a private sector CEO on that? And third, probably it will be great to hear on a lot more focused discussion, what do private sector aspirations for next short term in 1 to 2 years look like, and what would they really be? Because it's part of a strategy of moving from ambition to action. So I'm really hoping the discussion is not only about general discussion on barriers that we have been having for a long time, but concrete ideas. Thank you very much. Really look forward.
Thank you very much, Director General. I really would like to give the floor to all speakers for 1 minute each. I know it's very short, 1 minute, to present yourself. And you can present yourself either in English or in French, whatever. I will just say a word in French for all people who are using that language on a regular basis. Pour que cette session ne se passe pas uniquement en anglais, nous avons 2 orateurs au moins à table qui sont francophones, qui s'exprimeront en français. Pour la facilité des choses et pour ne pas rendre nos traducteurs complètement fous, moi je vais m'en tenir à l'anglais. Mais si vous voulez participer, poser des questions, n'hésitez pas dans votre langue préférée. I'm switching back to English, and I would like to give the floor, ladies first, to Anita to present herself and what you're doing. The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour. I'm Anita Marangoli George. I am CEO of Prosperity. We are a growth equity fund and an advisory firm. So we are actually advisors to ISA and have had the privilege to design the Global Solar Facility and Africa Solar Facility, taking into account experience from many such initiatives in the past. So I worked also in the World Bank along with DG Ashish and in the International Finance Corporation for several years. I also worked in a Canadian pension fund. And I think the reason that Gaetan invited me to this caucus is because I'm on the board of 2 large companies. One is First Solar, which is the largest solar panel manufacturer in the US. And then the other one is Tata Sons, which is the largest, it's the holding company of the largest Indian conglomerate. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, excellencies and dignitaries. Thank you very much to the ISA for having invited us. I represent the GRIA Council as its CEO and Vice President. The GRIA is the Green Rating for Integrated Habitat Assessment, which evaluates buildings as we construct them to be green, how we can become resource efficient, both at the time of design, construct, and thereafter operations. And obviously, the similarities that we work in as compared to the African continent is because that both of us, both the regions, we have a lot of infrastructure which is yet to be developed, and it gives us a huge amount of opportunity to make sure that we don't lock ourselves into inefficiencies, and that is what we do in terms of supporting the infrastructure development towards more sustainability as well as resilient to the onslaughts of changing climate change. I also am the program director for sustainable infrastructure in TERI, which is the Energy and Resources Institute of India, and we kind of develop innovative ideas for sustainable development as we move across finding solutions which are scalable and also cost effective. I think that's something which we must be mindful of, because this is a very cost sensitive market when we talk of sustainability. So these are the areas that we work in, and we would love to support the African nations as well to come up and build up the skills that are required to be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nana Kofi Safo Prempe. I represent a company called TFI Power Company Limited. It's a licensed independent power producer here in Ghana. We've been in the field of development of solar renewable energy power over the past 12 years or so. Our goal is obviously to help in the national development of energy to facilitate sustainable development of our economy. There are invariably many challenges in the sector that we are in, and I am here to perhaps share with you some of our experiences. I'm also a traditional leader, which means I'm very much involved in providing development, also, supporting my community in bringing various types of developments to the community, including power. And so I'm very happy, honored to be here, and hopefully we can share some experiences with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I wish I can introduce myself as a CEO, but I'm acting in the stead of my minister. I'm the Deputy Minister for Energy and Green Transition. My name is Richard Jan Mensah. So I'm only acting as the chair on behalf of my minister.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I was worried I'm the only non-CEO here, so that's a bit of comfort. My name is Ntongwe Nongene. I represent 247 Solar. I'm here representing my CEO, who's based in the US. We are an American solar energy company. We provide round-the-clock power and clean process heat from the sun for mining and industrial customers. So I'm here to share some insights and learn as well from the rest of the panel. Thank you.
If I'm not mistaken, it's CSP rather than PV, right?
Correct, it's CSP, that's correct.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gaurav Taneja. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gaurav Taneja. I'm responsible for the work Ernst & Young does with governments in South Asia and Africa. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here, so thank you, Isa, for this opportunity. I want to bring a wider perspective than PAR. As we work with governments as strategic consultants and advisors, the reforms that happen across industrializations, MSMEs, agriculture are equally important, relevant for success of the power sector. So I do want to provide some perspectives and thoughts and ideas that we've been sharing with governments, which will be very relevant to the energy community here. Thank you once again for inviting me.
Hello everyone, bonjour. Caroline Plaza, je dirige les activités de l'Institut Becquerel en France. On réalise des études de marché, on accompagne des acteurs privés et des acteurs publics avec des études de marché, des études de chaîne de valeur, des études technico-économiques, et on accompagne aussi différentes institutions et gouvernements en Afrique sur des feuilles de route technologiques et des feuilles de route pour le développement de certains aspects du marché solaire, mais plus largement également pour la transition énergétique.
Merci.
I am Dr. Francis Owiadolo, the CEO of Owosa Limited. It's a medium-sized renewable energy company based in Nigeria. Initially, when we started to fill the grid gaps in the urban area. So we're doing so much of rooftop solars, but at a point, we got a bit interested in the solar home systems, so that pushed us to the last mile communities. When we got there, I think we really got concerned about the fact that these communities were quite far and left behind. So we decided to do a bit of a mini grid. We just started that some few years ago, so we've done one. We have two in the in progress, and then some others in the pipeline. So we're a small organization, and we are more in the last mile communities. So I was invited here through ARA, Alliance for Rural Electrification. So I'm happy to be here, and I also hope I'll be able to contribute a bit of my experience from the other side, because I can see quite a lot of my colleagues are big players in the global market, but we're in the local market. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can start with you, since you are the last mile man. If you have a document in front of you with a certain number of subjects that seems of interest for ISA with regard to PV development in Africa or solar development in Africa in general, I would like to start with the first one, which is definitely about grid integration, but also infrastructure bottlenecks. And we know that we are not in the same situation in all countries. With 90% of electrifications here, the meaning of the last mile is a different understanding than, for instance, in Madagascar, where 14% of the population is electrified. I would like to ask you how you see it, and basically what would be, according to you, the main challenges in Africa in general with regard to infrastructure, and how can solar and storage could go alongside, I would say, to diminish the need for very short-term massive investments.
Okay. Well, of course, like I said, I am in the last mile community, and I think that's where the real need is. You'll find that when I came to Ghana here, I discovered that their challenge is a bit different from us in Nigeria. They seem to have a fairly reliable grid, and like the minister said, they have covered 90%. So the 10%, I believe, is in my kind of community. So I would say that the big challenge is actually reaching the last mile community. And the challenge now is more because economically, the last mile community is not attractive at all. So for the government, I mean, they look, most times, it's far away from the administration of government. And unfortunately also, for private people, if you are just focused on profits or commercial viability, of course, the last mile community will not be attractive. Because many of the last mile communities, by their arrangements, they might not be very big settlements. So, and you know, the more the connections, the more commercially viable things like mini grids are. So when you find small communities that are big, they are not, I mean, that solar system cannot really meet their needs. You know, solar system deals basically with lighting, like that. But when you are talking about empowering them economically, trying to stir up a small-scale industry, you find that the solar system cannot meet them, and yet they don't seem too viable for mini-grid. So it's a challenge. But when we went in there, for us, it was first, we just were interested, we were a bit curious about how it will look like. And our experience was quite interesting in the sense that we found that the last mile community is still very, they are interested in this, in energy. And they have the potentials to also use energy. But of course, because they've probably lost hope, many of them, they migrate. You find that most of these last mile communities, they are diminishing by the day, because there's really no incentive to remain there, you know. But when we got to these communities 2 years ago, first they were very excited, and we also saw that we could provide internet system to support energy, and that became a very interesting one for them. So we found that quite some of them started calling those in town The community is getting a bit bigger. The impact is really awesome, and we have some small industry, like you have a welder coming in there, you have those who are selling, having some cold stuffs coming in there, and that has put a bit of pressure on us. So you have several communities, small, coming up like that, and that's where we are. We now say, how do we get access to finance? For people like us, our initial model, because we are mainly traders when we're in town, we just get solar components and all that, and we use it to meet the energy gaps in town. But you see, then people were paying, because in the urban areas, the customers pay for the equipment. But when we got here, we need to invest. So we discovered that we need access to some good funding. Now, the challenge we have as an organization was that we didn't really have a very good structure, because we're just traders. We didn't really see the need for a structure. But we are now refining our structure and all that to be a bit more attractive, to be easier for us to access funds. So that's where we are. So I think the last mile community is strategies that we should be looking at, is strategies that can make them really included in this. So if you can look at MSCs, small developers also, who wants to go there, I think we should be looking at how the strategy that can pull such private people. Most times they are going to be local people, because the big mini-grid organizations, they are, of course, global companies, and they can't afford to operate at the very local market. So it's a way to, it's a strategy or a framework that makes it easy for smaller developers, smaller solar organizations to be able to fit into the private sector, because they are the ones that can really reach the smaller mile community, not the big players. Thank you.
I would like someone in the panel to comment on that, especially if you have either a different perspective or just willing to go in the same direction. Who would like to take the floor? No one? Anita, if you want, but take the mic. Sorry? So do you want to comment on what has been said? I can summarize it in a little provocative way. People in cities will always have enough money to attract investors, to build infrastructure. People on the countryside or in remote areas, basically like the last mile, will be always much more complex in terms of financing and operating infrastructure.
I would say that broadly that is true, but it doesn't mean that it's not possible. And I'd like to take the example, because I forgot to mention that I'm also on the board of the Self-Employed Women's Association's Loan Resilience and Recovery Fund. And what the Seva sisters, they have 3 million members, and what they've managed to do in very rural areas is to substitute diesel pumps with solar pumps for salt mining. And this is a very successful project. Initially, I would say for these kind of projects where there is a social element, the economics may not be demonstrated right away. It's important to get some blended finance, as was mentioned this morning, some concessional finance from the development finance institutions. But very soon we saw that for the women that benefited from this financing, it was a very economical and profitable transition. So getting it together in a form where private investors would be willing to step up, and we are seeing that in different markets. In India, for example, there are several companies who are providing solar pumps for the rural sector, and therefore I think it needs demonstration and then the ability to show profitability. And that's very key for the private sector to come in.
I find it quite interesting perspective because you're enlarging the scope. So we're discussing about last mile, we're already discussing about very specific applications. And especially in agriculture, water pumping, I'm sure other people in the panel would like to comment on that. Mr. Sanjay, for instance.
In the agriculture sector, did you say?
Yes.
Well, that's not my forte. I'm more on the building side.
Okay, excuse me. Right. I will come back to you just after. Sorry. I really would like to have someone commenting on agriculture and especially water pumping and similar applications. If anyone in the panel is willing to do that. Otherwise, I can ask. Yes, Mr. Nana.
Well, I was just going to say that, in Ghana and most other parts of Africa, one of our biggest challenges is post-harvest losses, especially in the rural areas where I am from. So Ghana is actually quite fortunate to have a very high electricity penetration rate. I think it's about 87%. And the last mile, the government is actually making a great effort to address this by implementing mini grids in the island communities where you cannot actually extend the grid to. But I think as part of that, we'll probably then try to extend these mini grids to include, not just drying and storage of produce or harvest, but also actually the water that one may need to fertilize the land, because unfortunately, most of our farmers rely on the rainy season, which is 2 seasons. We have the major rainy season, which just ended. The second will start somewhere around November, and so outside of that, it's very, very difficult. And so what happens is, we're a major consumer of tomatoes, and I think like other southern, global South nations. And so once we are in the rainy season, we produce a lot of these tomatoes. But in the dry season, we suddenly find us having to import. And so I think the idea of deploying these mini grids into these farming and island communities will go a long way to helping to run engender all year round productivity, as well as the ability to store and even to process some of these products. So we're definitely looking forward to implement a lot of these mini grids in these communities. But I think maybe perhaps down the line we'll come to the issue of finance. I don't want to get too much into that just yet.
I have no problem if you go into that, since it's one of the subjects I would like to touch after. So please go ahead.
Well, I just think we've got to try to be creative. Financing is the major bottleneck that we face. And I think perhaps an organization like ISA can be quite influential in coming up with some mechanism that will facilitate financing into utilizing renewable energy towards agriculture. For example, we can have a situation whereby certain communities that grows certain crops, they can be provided with this power infrastructure, and then ISA can create some sort of guarantee or insurance mechanism, right, whereby these farmers are receiving the power, and somehow there's another organization that helps them offtake or bring their products to the market, and a portion of that goes to pay for the investment that brings them the power in the first place. So I think things like this sort of solution is what we need to look at, because although there's a lot of investors that wants to come and invest, most of them are afraid of the perceived risk, not the actual risk. The actual risk is actually quite low, but the perception of risk is quite high. So perhaps such an organization that its members are quite familiar with some of these problems can in fact get together and come up with such solutions whereby we have an insurance scheme that helps support the development of solar power into the agriculture space. So I'll leave it here for now.
I will keep as a second point before giving the floor to your two neighbors, the point that perceived risk is much higher than the real risk. And that's something which is essential when we're talking about financing. What's the difference between the real risk for investors and the perceived risk? And indeed, we see in some African countries absolutely awful interest rates on microcredits, for instance, which are hampering that kind of development. And that can be a very interesting course of action, in my opinion. Thank you. I see that at least two people willing to comment.
I think maybe I will cede it to them so that when, as an acting chair, when they finish, I can sum everything up.
With your permission, can I just go back to the earlier question?
Of course.
I think it's a question of building economic scale. As soon as you start clustering things together, and we've seen that in some parts of South Asia, that instead of a single farmer, if you create farmer-producer organizations, the economies of scale definitely go up. You don't need one pump for farmer. You need far fewer, but at the same time, you need higher capacity, and the community can pay because it's not just dependent on one person. Second is, as soon as you have some value addition closer to the farm gate, your energy needs go up. So it's a question of building some level of scale rather than discrete households. Of course, it'll still be through a microgrid and not the full transmission lines. So that's the first point. The second point I wanted to make is that there are many, many industries, including in the power sector itself in the past, where universal service obligations have paid for underserved areas, whether it's airlines, whether it's telecoms, certain other areas as well. So this is an area that the governments, various governments need to think, whether it's central governments or provincial governments, whether there is an ability to actually create a USO which goes towards funding some kind of projects. This could be guarantee, could be subvention, could be direct subsidy, whichever way it is. I'm not getting into that. But I'm using the concept of USO on a slightly wider basis to encourage governments to think about underserved areas and how that initial capital can go towards building a stronger ROI and giving comfort to the private sector. Thank you.
I think we are perfectly into the second subject about basically in investment climate in general. Who wants to go on this specific point? Yes, please.
Okay. On this agric side, I also want to share a bit of recent experience too. You see, where we operate in Nigeria is the Niger Delta region, where there's a lot of water. So you find that their major occupation there is fishing. We also noticed that there's a challenge of just not able to optimize the value of fishing because there are no storage materials. So recently we've also started working with some women. It's still a project in progress where we'll have them come together to own small cooling systems, so that they can store their fishes and that they can enhance the value. So I will also suggest that, there should be more aggression in every aspect of the solar PV systems that enhances agriculture. It's real value for the local people because the people are quite excited with this, and we see that as we'll be able to deploy some more. The main challenge, of course, is always what we are planning to do is to use pay as you go system for the refrigerators so that together they can pay over time. Then after some time they will own together. So the plan is, they will have, if 5, 6 people own one small, maybe like 200 liters freezer, then they will share according to their ownership and all that. So that's one of those things we are doing in our community. Also, I believe very much that depending on the kind of agric that is practiced in the community, solutions will always add value. I also know a bit about water pumps too, that has great potential in some other side, but I think there's the need to focus on that aggressively to be able to reach the last mile community.
Please.
I think the principal question is actually grid integration, and I'm not sure if we've actually sufficiently addressed the topic.
Please come back to it.
There's, again, this perception that in order to deploy solar power on a massive scale, you do need to somehow create a whole new transmission infrastructure. And that's really not the case. Here in Ghana, our Energy Commission has a rule that for grid implementation of solar power, anything above 20 megawatts will require some sort of power modulation technology, right? And there are stuff like plant controllers, or even now with the cost of batteries coming down, you can actually substitute batteries for this. Or in the worst case, you can actually use some genset to help mitigate that intermittency, that grid intermittency. If we are talking about industrialization on the continent, yes, mini grids are great, but they will not do the job. We really need great industrial, great power. And so that means we need to figure out a way to integrate solar power and other renewable sources onto the national grid. And I think that can be done if we take advantage of the reducing cost of battery power, as well as just add a bit of gensets to achieve that moderation of the grid intermittency. And here in Ghana, I think in terms of trading across, we have in West Africa fairly well integrated, interregional or regional transmission grid between Ghana and Burkina, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire and Togo. I think there is an opportunity to trade power across borders. And I think recently there's actually been some discussions of doing a barter system between Ghana and Nigeria, whereby Nigeria has plenty of gas that they can supply to us, and we in turn will generate electricity and provide it to them. And then we think, this might require some amount of great upgrades, but I think ultimately it's an investment that can be done, because the outcome of that will be availability of power, electricity, which we really need if we are to industrialize on a massive scale, which is really the challenge that is facing the continent at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you.
I decided to end, but I think I have to speak now. I think ISA has done so well, and this platform created by ISA actually brings together the private sector and governments. And with this, if we look at the last mile communities and getting electricity to especially in Ghana, let me say the island areas, for instance, as was earlier stated, it's actually not attractive to the private sector. One is because even the communities that you send it to are not able to pay for it as vis-a-vis the investment that you put in. So I would rather call for us, once we are coming up with this deliberation, the ideas that we are actually bringing up, we would want ISA should also partner government. And it's actually interesting to note that almost everyone here we have ministers here, so ministers will now take these issues up and see how it would affect our policy formulations, so that we have policies that would actually create an environment where it will make it more attractive to the private sector to invest in last mile electricity assets, because the government cannot do it alone. And when you come to the grid integration, for instance, I think I saw Enetrac here. Enetrac has a project, upcoming project in the eastern part of Ghana. And as a government, we realized that the power to be generated from renewable, that is solar and wind, but when they produce it, how they get it into the grid will become a challenge. So government has a policy of actually, we have this great infrastructure project from Accra to Kumasi, but quickly we have to factor them, because if we do our infrastructure network, it means that after their generation, they also have to invest in actually now connecting the power generated into the main grid, which will be expensive and it will not be very attractive to them even to invest in it. So quickly government have to adapt and consider them so that their integrated network would pass closer, so they can also be able to offload their power into the national grid when they're able to come up with a production. So I want the government to look at policies that will put in place. One has to do with, especially with tax waivers, if we really want to actually pursue this agenda so well. And also have to look at the enabling environment. Sometimes even the regulatory processes. It's something that is not attractive. And then finally, especially when it comes to agric, how government is, when you're using solar, the water pump machines that you mentioned, the solar engineered one. If the farmer is assured of post-harvest sales, and if government can guarantee that, like in Ghana we have the food buffer system, if it is well tailored such that they target the farmers after production, government is going to go in, then it becomes more lucrative for an investor to invest in solar, knowing that the farmer who is going to take the power will be able to pay for it at the end of harvest. So I think there should be a conscious effort, and I would actually call on ISA to lead in collaborating with government to make sure that whatever ideas that are coming up from here will not just end here, or maybe we'll repeat it next year, but it should be, I would say that it should be assimilated. That means that it should be implemented, so that the next time when we come, we are looking at other innovative programs relating to the subject area. So that's a little I want to add to it. Thank you.
I find it extremely interesting, and I would like to rephrase and to be sure that I have understood you perfectly. Because what you are saying is, and it's a very important message, is that somehow the financing of infrastructure, which is needed for the grid, including cross-border and other things, is very hard to finance with private money, so should be completely financed, or at least guaranteed, either with public money in Ghana itself or from international organizations. Is it something, the kind of message that you would like to pass to this assembly?
I'm saying, you see, we always look at the international organizations coming to support. It's not bad, but government also have policies that we can use to drive investment into that field. Mm-hmm. So it is not about somebody bringing, just like in the mini grids in Ghana, I cited example, we have been supported by the Swiss government, and so it's a the government of Swiss and government of Ghana collaboration. But you don't see any private sector coming into mini grids, with the exception of Nana and his team, that is the Enclave Power, for instance. And because that is it is in Tema, a more commercial area. So power generated, there's an off-taker who is ready to pay for it. But when you take it to the island areas where predominantly the people are peasant farmers, the private investor would ask, how am I going to make or recoup my investment back? And that is what I'm saying, that there are opportunities there. Government should come in. Yes, private sector may come in, and then also international, multinational donor funding and all other things. But I think that government, with the support of ISA, So initiate something that makes it more attractive for the private sector to enter that space. Because if you are only looking forward to multinationals to come and do it, that is why Ghana, we've already reached 90%. We are still struggling to meet the remaining 10%, which are mainly island areas or hard-to-reach areas. And the investment in the grid to those areas relatively are expensive as compared to going the mini grid. So I am advocating that there should be a partnership between governments and the private sector, and I'm only calling on ISA to lead that discussion. Once you have government officials here, and then you have the private sector also here, that collaboration is what I am calling for.
Anita, please.
I completely agree with the Deputy Minister. In fact, I wish DG Ashish was here, because we together did the first large solar farm which combined the public and the private sector. So the World Bank financed the public sector to do the evacuation infrastructure, the access roads, but the land was also procured by the government. And then private sector firms competed against each other, and it was the first time that India achieved grid parity through this project. So I think your suggestion that the public sector can do some things which enable and minimize the risk, it's a process of risk allocation, such that the private sector steps in, and then they compete with each other to give the best outcome for the consumers. So this is a model, I think, which is very doable.
I would like to give the floor to the three panelists we have who haven't expressed their thought yet. So I will ask you a very specific question. And then, because I think time is running fast, I will ask to all of you to think in 1 minute about one recommendation that, based on your experience, you think might be interesting for this audience. But first, I would like to ask my colleague, and you can express yourself in French. We have discussed a little bit about agriculture, and I think the combination of agriculture with PV represent a very interesting path of development, but I would like to have your opinion.
Oui, merci. On l'a beaucoup entendu ce matin. D'ailleurs, le lien entre le solaire et l'agriculture, c'est un lien qui est très fort. On le voit, on entend beaucoup le pompage solaire, par exemple. Mais il y a aussi le concept d'agrivoltaïsme. Alors, l'agrivoltaïsme a différentes définitions selon les pays. Et c'est vraiment des roadmaps qui sont en train de se construire dans différentes régions du monde. Mais le principe fondateur, c'est d'avoir une unité foncière et de mettre à la fois du solaire et de la production agricole, que ça soit ou entre les rangées de panneaux, par exemple, ou en dessous des panneaux, en ayant des structures un peu surélevées. Et je trouve ces applications, en fait, avec un potentiel très intéressant. En Afrique, on l'a vu, on a organisé un workshop au mois de juillet à Lomé, au Togo, dans le cadre d'une mission des Nations Unies pour le Sénégal, la Guinée, le Togo et la République du Congo, où on voit, en fait, ce lien très spécifique dans l'agrivoltaïsme aussi dans ces régions-là, avec l'eau, en fait la gestion de l'eau. Et on a travaillé également en Tunisie ou au Maghreb, où le fait de protéger les cultures du changement climatique, on utilise vraiment ces technologies pour protéger en fait la production, sécuriser la production alimentaire et diminuer aussi le besoin en eau. Il y a aussi des idées de récupérer l'eau et, comme on l'a dit tout à l'heure, de changer peut-être aussi les périodes de production. Vous l'avez dit, monsieur, aussi tout à l'heure, la production selon le timing. Et donc, il y a vraiment ce lien très fort qui est refait avec à la fois la production d'énergie, la souveraineté et la sécurité alimentaire et la gestion de l'eau. Et je trouve très intéressant ce que vous avez dit, vous aussi, tout à l'heure, c'est que ces applications-là, on peut les imaginer à la fois, et ça combine en fait vos deux visions. On peut le voir pour le dernier miles, comme vous dites, en support en fait aussi à l'électrification rurale, mais on peut le voir aussi sur des grandes fermes sur lesquelles on ne vient pas prendre de la terre agricole, où on est connecté au réseau et sur lequel on vient apporter à l'industrie, aux agropoles, aux industries en lien avec l'agriculture, une fourniture en énergie peu chère et green. Je ne trouve plus les mots en français après avoir entendu l'anglais toute la journée. Et donc, peut-être aussi un lien très fort, et c'est pour ça que c'est une réelle opportunité, et que il me semble que c'est une réelle opportunité, les feuilles de route sont à dessiner et adaptées à chaque contexte, à la fois climatique et agricole. Ce lien fort qu'on entend, que vous avez dit, qu'on entend aussi dans les workshops, avec le fait d'utiliser l'énergie qu'on produit donc sur ces terres agricoles pour faire des nouveaux business en fait et ajouter de la valeur, comme on parle depuis tout à l'heure de financement. Finalement, ça permet aussi quand on protège l'agriculture, quand on améliore la valeur économique de l'agriculture, on ajoute de la valeur à ces projets et on peut également apporter du stockage, du refroidissement et créer en fait des activités économiques qui étaient inexistantes et qui permettent également d'augmenter la valeur économique de l'activité agricole. Voilà.
Thank you. Mr. Enongene, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Yes, correct.
I think it's interesting to have a different technology perspective.
Yeah. My technology is different. It's mostly focused on minor industrial customers, but I just wanted to touch base on your question on the role of solar PV in agriculture. I think in Africa, it's fair to say that the African economy is an agricultural economy. If you look at the countries across our great continent, almost 50% of the countries are really agricultural economies. 50% of their GDPs is on agriculture. So agriculture is definitely the backbone of the African economy. But if you look at where we stand today, our agriculture is still very much behind, even though it contributes for over 50% of the GDP of most of the countries. Our agriculture is still not mechanized. Irrigation is still not mechanized. There's massive post-harvest losses on the rise across the African continent. So this is what makes solar solutions very crucial in the agricultural sector, because this has the potential to transform the way we drive agriculture in Africa. If you look at irrigation, for instance, in the morning I was listening to the Minister of Energy for Ghana, and he said in the north of Ghana for over 6 months, agriculture is idle due to weather conditions. Imagine the transformative effect that these solar solutions can have if those areas of the north can pump water from the ground through solar solutions. It means this is 6 months of agricultural time being captured. Imagine the impact on the economy. If we look at other aspects like post-harvest losses that are very rampant. I'm from Cameroon, and in Cameroon, it's crazy. Like, my grandparents were farmers, and I would see them lose 70% of the crops. Now, with solar solutions, we can have the ability to dry these crops and ensure that the crops can live from the farms to the market in good conditions. Now, what does this do? This creates jobs. This puts money back in the hands of the rural people, especially the women in the farms, and this pumps money into the economy. So just to reiterate that, the solar solutions have not just an important role in agriculture, but indeed a crucial role that's going to transform agriculture in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Sanjay for a different perspective, which is PV on building. Just before you start, I'm going to ask the organizers for 5-6 more minutes after that speech so that all panelists can come with one idea that might be the conclusion of this. I think we are not at 5 minutes today. So if you agree, that would be really great. Please, Sanjay.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to shift gears from agriculture to the housing sector, and how each household can become a generator through the solar rooftop program. And that's where I think the work that we do, through design interventions, optimize the solar sizing to bring down the costs, because these are obviously there is an initial cost that is associated with installation of solar panels. So how do we optimize it, making sure that you, through efficient design, through low cost, no cost measures, bring in these strategies for bringing down your demand, so as to say, and thereafter piggybacking on the efficiencies that you have put into the design strategies, optimize your solar requirements and use the rooftops as generators. And this is a program which is currently on by the Government of India. It's a unique program which has been launched by the Honorable Prime Minister. And it is a solar rooftop program where 300 units of electricity are provided free of cost to the marginalized sections. And I think about 10 million households gain from it. And then this helps to kind of decentralize solar power generation, making India more reliant on cleaner energy sources, thereby reducing our dependence on fossil fuels. It also is a significant step towards India's climate goals. It helps us to do that, promoting clean, renewable energy, contributing in reduction of carbon emissions. It also provides substantial subsidy to reduce the upfront cost of the installations, as I said. For example, it's about 60% for a 2 kilowatt system and a 40% subsidy for up to systems up to 3 kilowatt. And then, of course, households can accelerate collateral-free, low-cost loans from banks for the remaining costs of the solar systems. This also becomes an additional source of income because anything that is generated surplus can be fed back into the grid. So I think it's a very good ecosystem which has been created to upscale, solar integration into the grid, as a result of which, it not only does that, it also brings in a lot of social elements into the system as well. And I think it's a very good business model. So it's actually a business model which works well, and at the same time, you're making sure that your dependence on fossil fuels is reduced. So I'll stop there.
So you obviously had perfectly your place in this panel. I would like, please, we can start with you for a 1 minute conclusion with a recommendation for ISA and people in the room.
Yeah, so I think, creating business models for scale up, empowering the end users for taking informed decision making, I think those are models on which we should work, and that really requires a lot of creation of awareness and capacity building. So we are willing to do that, and I think that's the story that the ISA is also creating.
Anita,
Thank
for
you.
conclusion.
Seeing is believing, so having a few projects which demonstrate that it can be done, and I think again the coming of the public and the private sector together is critical, and money will follow where you have credible projects. And I'm a great believer that money is not the constraint. It's having well-structured projects that have the opportunity to scale that will attract the capital.
My understanding is that the ISA was formed to really propagate the deployment of solar energy around the world. And to foster that mission here in Ghana and most of the global southern countries, our biggest challenge is financing. I think I made a previous comment about risk and perception of risk. And I think the role that ISA can do to mitigate this risk is what our Deputy Minister just alluded to, which is there's a need to collaborate with government. And specifically, I think the ISA can work with government, DFIs, climate philanthropies, other organizations that are geared towards the so-called energy transition to come up with some sort of guarantee program that will help the private sector, basically drive investment into the deployment of solar energy. And again, as the minister said, within the local economies, the governments know what they produce within, so for example, if it is agriculture that we need to use solar power for, well, then the government can also help to offtake what is produced, whether it's in the basic raw materials or whether it's processed, and then a domestic or an external market can be found. But I think the starting point is for the ISA to work with government and with other international organizations to come up with some sort of guarantee fund that is geared towards providing investment guarantees to the private sector so that they will find a comfort to invest in whether it's great scale power projects or mini grids for island communities or upgrading the transmission networks so that we can implement more solar technologies. I think this is crucial. So what I would like to see is for the ISA to work towards how they can help work with government to come up with some sort of guarantee that will be given to the private sector so that they will have the comfort to invest in solar in the global southern economies. Thank you.
I can give you the last word if you want. I don't know.
Oh, okay. So as we end it, I just would want us, especially we within the African or West African sub-region, I think that there should be a conscious or deliberate policy to focus on how we can use solar energies to power our agriculture, because we can do a lot from our agriculture. So government and then the international organizations, whatever we can do to make sure that it becomes very attractive for private sector and even government to invest in this area so that we can use the solar. And I gave an example when I was earlier giving the submission that in Ghana, our off-peak is during the day. Our peak period is in the night. So when production is required during the day, we rather even have excess power. So we still also have a lot of light during the day. And we can actually generate a lot of power from the solar to power our agriculture, not just agric, fishing as well, and then agro-processing. So there should be a conscious effort from government and collaboration with the private sector international organization. So whilst we live here, I would also want that, at least consciously, the African countries and the health here ministers, let's come up with a policy, use it with the support of ISA, that we are moving within now to the next 3 years. There's a policy that we are going to work with to make sure that we get the enabling environment of using solar to power agriculture. And I think we can decide something here and work with it going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I would like to wrap up by saying that we've discussed a lot about the crucial role that solar solutions play. However, we've talked so much about solar PV solutions, but there's more than just solar PV solutions. We've got CSP solutions. And one of the challenges, and this is my sector, I sell a CSP solution, is the adoption of the solutions and financing of power projects driven by the solutions. So I think stakeholders in the solar space like ISA and other solar stakeholders can really push for the adoption of new solutions and driving financing for these new solutions. A second and last thought, and I'm going to be very brief, is the need for us to push for decentralized solar systems. I think this is a game changer, especially in Africa, rather than having big centralized systems. We should push for decentralized systems because with this, we have proximity to where this power is needed. If you look at my industry, for instance, the mining and industrial customers, look at countries like Zimbabwe, they're really saying the mining sector must self-generate, right? So for this, you need mini-grid solutions designed for these mining players. So with decentralized solutions, we're able to do this. But these players are also trying to decarbonize. So it's not just about the power, but also thermal solutions, which mines and industrial customers need. And these centralized solar solutions wouldn't provide this, but you have decentralized solar PV solar solutions that would provide round-the-clock power for this mining industrial customers, but also clean thermal solutions that they need to drive thermal operations. So those are just the two thoughts I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you.
We spent a lot of time in the earlier part of the day talking about investment and financing. In most parts of Africa, governments are the largest asset owners in the energy sector. I would surmise that in a sequential way, step-by-step way, some of those assets need to be monetized and a special purpose fund be created for the energy sector. This can finance, this can be the anchor finance, and then blended finance can come from IFI, so on and so forth. So you have the capital you need to move the capital from core assets to bankable, financeable assets. And this is easily doable. And I'm not saying privatize overnight, but in a sequential way where the least disruption that can come in. We didn't talk about it, but I definitely think manufacturing in PV is required locally. And my view is that it should not be one very large manufacturing facility. We need a hub and spoke model. And by what I mean by a spoke model is when you set up solar in rural areas, if something goes wrong, it takes very long to repair it. But if you have a spoke model where some assembly O&M facilities are created, then if something goes wrong, they can be repaired fairly quickly. So I would say asset monetization in a sequential step-by-step way to finance further energy projects and manufacturing in a hub and spoke way for PV. Thank you.
Very interesting point.
Oui, je vais rebondir sur ce que les panélistes du Ghana ont évoqué à nouveau et peut-être mettre le focus qui a été mon intervention sur peut-être le besoin de travailler sur des modèles économiques et sur ce lien très fort qu'on a entendu dans la journée entre électrification et agriculture et sur les modèles économiques combinés de création de nouvelles activités qui peuvent avoir à la fois un impact un impact sur l'accès à l'énergie, un impact sur le besoin en eau, sur l'irrigation, sur l'impact économique sur l'activité agricole, mais aussi un impact social sur la création de business, et de regarder en fait ces modèles économiques combinés, de mettre en œuvre des pilotes, des démonstrateurs ou des feuilles de route stratégiques qui sont adaptées à chaque contexte pour démontrer ce modèle économique un peu nouveau et combiné. Et je reprendrai aussi, il y aurait beaucoup de choses à dire sur voilà aussi la capacité à maintenir ces systèmes dans ces zones et la maintenance en fait et la capacité à maintenir ces systèmes et à les financer sur les chaînes de valeur locales. Mais je crois qu'il y a vraiment beaucoup de choses. Je vais laisser le micro.
Thank you. Last but not least.
Yeah, my last suggestion is since we don't want to leave anyone behind, I think in the planning, in the financing, whatever template or framework that ISA may be working with government with, there is the need to relate with not just government at the center, but government at the middle level, government at the grassroots level. In my country, for instance, recently one of those encouraging things that have been done is there have been a decentralization of the electricity power management systems from the federal. Before it was just federal government, but now it has gone to the state level. Hopefully, we believe it may get to the local government level. So we should look at all aspects of it should involve the last mile. Even the private sector is not just the global players alone. National players should be involved. Local players should be involved. There should be a template that can involve everyone, because if everyone is not involved, then the last mile community will surely be left behind, because there are some places and some terrains that big or global organizations cannot operate because they don't understand the context. But they can build a framework that will also empower or identify the unique ways that private initiatives will not just be at the federal level, but at the state level, at the local level. The private initiative should be intentionally involved in the process of using solar to find solutions, whether it's for mini-grid, productive use system for agri, whatever. I think if we do that, then we'll have a more inclusive program generally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know we have passed the time. I will take 1 minute to summarize. I would say that it's very good that the timer is not going in negative. So finally, we are just on time. There are many points which have been addressed, and some which are in the working document, which we had no time to address, especially the question of local manufacturing, which in my opinion is essential. And the last one, which will be addressed in a session tomorrow about digitalization and the use of artificial intelligence. But I would like to focus on 2-3 points. I've heard many times the word agriculture, and I really think it's a focal point with very specific regulatory schemes, very specific investment, very specific ways of developing solar systems that should be considered very specifically for that segment of the population in Africa, depending on the local specific, and something to be adapted very locally with local expertise. The second point is, and I find it totally obvious, but it's always interesting to hear it, the last mile is not attractive for financing. And it's the same thing as saying that poverty is not attractive for capitalism. So it means at some point we need some public investment for the regions and the segment of the population which cannot finance it themselves, at least in the beginning. And that's probably the key of success that we have seen in numerous African countries which have accelerated that. And the last point is about infrastructure in general. I've heard many things, and I'm putting buildings in the infrastructure. I really think there is a need for comprehensive schemes to pre-finance cross-border mechanism, but also for connecting much more head of the grid system to the main grids and anticipate future development. And that's definitively something that I think we can take on from this panel. I'm finishing here. I would like to thank all of you for this participation, and the CEO Caucus will continue, so I look forward to continue this discussion with all of you in the coming months. Don't hesitate to bring new ideas, new recommendations. They are all welcome, and thanks a lot for ISA for organizing this. I think it's always interesting to discuss with the private sector and real practitioners. Thank you very much.